CR101radio.com, podcasts, and more. And welcome back to another episode of Christian Reconstruction 101. My name is Jeremy Walker, and I am your host. Today on this episode, we are going to be discussing the foundations of Christian civilization. I know that sounds weird. Most people think that Christianity is a spiritualized type thing, where it's about the here and after and not about the now. And of course, we don't really have a word from God, at least according to most people, that has anything to do with our laws and, of course, how we're supposed to conduct our behavior and teach others how to be civilized. So, let's start this episode with the question, what is civilization? What is it to be a civilized person? Well, in this time and age right now, in various parts of the United States and, of course, in Europe, we are starting to see a whole lot of what the differences are between the first, second, and third worlds are, and why they have the different names for them. And it's not about the economy. It's about, of course, how people act. It's about how civilizations are constructed or not constructed. And, of course, how is it that people conduct themselves around other people, for other people? How do they interact with the economy? How do they build families? How do they treat people? Well, to go ahead and get us started with the concept of civilized, I don't think you can separate the word whatsoever from God and, of course, the Word of God itself. To be civilized is to be a person who is now bringing themselves into conformity to something. Now, the standard of what is civilized and what is uncivilized, that's going to be based on what you think the standard is. So I looked up the definition for civilized, and I came up with civilized is an adjective that describes a society with a highly developed culture, technology, and social structure. On an individual level, it refers to polite, refined, and reasonable behavior. It also applies to environments or situations that are comfortable, orderly, and well managed. There are some core definitions that go along with that, like social development. It refers to a society or a country or system characterized by established laws, industry, fair justice, and humane cultural practices. There's personal etiquette, used to describe someone who is well-bred, courteous, and respectful. They maintain a calm demeanor when they have discussions and things like that. And lastly, order and comfort. This describes a setting or experience that is present and orderly, as opposed to chaotic and or primitive. Well, right now, all around the world, especially in certain parts of the U.S. and in Europe, this is where all the spotlights are on and all the social media is focused on these things, because we have mass immigration, or illegal immigration, rather. And that's not the focus of today's episode remotely. But it does bring out and shed light on the subject of what happens when a civilization that has been influenced by Christianity for a very, very long time, like, say, here in America, 250 years plus. What happens then when you have a civilization that is built and grounded on God's commandments and influenced by it, and the people have been brought into conformity to it, your law structure, and then you bring over people who come from uncivilized? And only what it means by to be uncivilized means non-Christianized, because the word itself, to be civilized, actually means that you have brought yourself into conformity or been influenced by God and His commandments. Now, having stated that, that is all you really need to know to see what's going on in the world. The people that are coming into Europe and the United States and all of a sudden are causing problems, for them, that's normal. And you're the civilized, Christian-influenced nation that they've come into, you're the problem, because you're expecting them to understand your laws. You're expecting them to behave like you do, because, of course, you have a certain level of expectancy. Well, the problem comes in because the two just don't go together. And it's being done on purpose, of course. And some people would ask, well, why is this such a big deal? Why is it important to bring people into countries like Europe and the United States who are not Christianized or not civilized? And the importance is they want to destroy that. Shared on many different podcast episodes that the concepts going around right now of racism and many other terms have nothing to do with skin color. It has everything to do with religion. And when you listen to people, it comes out, it leaks out every now and then. And the truth kind of peers through the blinds there. And it all has to do with getting rid of Christian civilization. Now, most people don't even understand that. They think it's about immigration. They think it's about illegal immigration. They think it's about X, Y, and Z. But they don't pinpoint it on the fact that people want to deliberately dilute civilization so that it is no longer influenced by Christianity. And, of course, they want to uncivilize America. Now, of course, they couldn't do that through trying to influence people. America's just got 250 plus years of Christian influence. Therefore, it's too hard to get out of the people who were lived here, born here, and we consider Christian civilization to be normal. And, of course, these are the people who see that and are disgusted by it, mostly because it has to do with God, Christ, and his commandments, and they're at war with him. Now, as Christians, we don't even see that. That's why most churches don't even teach God's law. They're going to teach about Christ, they're going to teach about Christ's sacrifice, but they will not teach about law. They'll say we're under grace, not under law. Well, that's all true and dandy, but these are, of course, what I like to call people who are not paying attention whatsoever. They are like the kindergartners that go through high school, and they never learn anything else beyond the level of kindergarten. They are spiritually immature. The difference being, mature people grow. They learn more, and that, of course, helps them to better conduct themselves throughout the world. Mature Christians learn God's law. It focuses how they teach their family, how they raise their family, how they order their family, how they order their churches. And so Christians should be learning God's commandments. Because the opposite is also true. In Proverbs 29:18, it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keepeth the law, happy is he. And this has a couple different translations when you go back. If you use things like Bible Gateway, I do, highly recommend it. It really means right here, this verse, because this, of course, is King James Version. It means when there is no vision or there's no instruction from God being taught, not being presented, it's not being passed out, it's not being declared. The people in law and order break down. And, of course, they do perish. Why would King James say perish? Other ones just say law and order is broken down. Because whenever law and order, meaning God's law and order, are broken, judgment comes. That's also this little side that we don't talk about happening in America today and what's going on in Europe. Throughout the entire Bible, God raises up nations to be a judgment on nations who were supposedly godly. And whenever they decide to turn their back on God, God turns other nations on them as a judgment. That's a massive part of what we're seeing in the world today. And before all the problems can get fixed, these so-called civilized, Christianized nations, well, they're going to have to get back to brass tacks. It's really not that complicated. But here's the difference. What does that have to do with us? Because a lot of people like to talk about the political side of things, and you have to, because eventually it all trickles downhill. Meaning if it starts with the individual, that's at the top. And then it goes to the family, and it goes to the business, and eventually goes to the nation. And so you really have to flip the top-down approach. People think that politics and influencing the world is the top core thing you're trying to do. Or in fact, you're just trying to influence the individual, because the individual will influence all those around them. The individual will structure their family based on what they've been taught, based on their faith, based on what they truly believe. And then, of course, that will be how they structure not just their family and their business, but their community, their nations, and, of course, their governments, and what laws that they have and want to be under. And so we really have to just reorder what we think is the most important thing on the planet. Most people want to go argue with people. Well, we're not told to argue. Christians are never told to go argue. We're told to declare. We're told to teach. We're told to disciple. But then there's lots of people who don't want to hear what you have to say. What does the Bible say about that? Does that mean you go out there and get your signs and go argue with them, videotape yourself, and put it on social media? No, that's not doing any good whatsoever. It's one of the last things you want to do. Instead, you should be ignoring people that don't want to hear what you have to say. You're just going to upset them. The Bible has tons and tons to say about it, which I'm not going to get into right now. There's tons to say about the idea that you should not be trying to bother people with the truth. Now, that's a weird way of saying it. I know you say, well, we're just trying to give the truth. There's nothing wrong with that. Yes, there is. There's a whole big problem with that. And people are shocked. They go to places where they're not welcome. You know what you're teaching is not welcome. And they say, well, I'm just doing the Great Commission. I'm presenting the gospel. No, these people, the vast majority of them, have already heard what you have to say. And in the first 5 seconds, you learn that they don't want anything to do with you. And so you can just say, well, thank you very much. I'm not trying to upset you. And you can move on your way. Go on to greener pastures, Christian. The Christian's duty is not to deal with the strangers and going after people they've never met, to go on to college campuses and try to confront people with their known sins. They might be at an event trying to express how much they love their sin, and you're, of course, the one going there to try to tell them that they're doing something wrong or that it's wrong for them. Well, here's another little interesting tidbit for you, for the listener. And this, of course, is mainly, because like I said, we have to focus on ourselves primarily. So when I teach for my children, I teach with my wife, and we do have an outreach. We're in preschools. And so I highly believe in teaching people you've never met, the general public, if you want to call it that. I wouldn't say strangers, but the general public. So it's not that it's anti-evangelical, but take the concept of a Christian school. People are coming there voluntarily. They want you to teach their children. You'll tell them that you're teaching Christianity to their children, that you're going to teach them to obey God's commandments and to structure the classroom and their life according to the commandments. And so you're being open and honest about it. You are civilizing the children. And a lot of it is really just that. Young children today, they're really not given many standards that they have to meet, no requirements of them. And they really are running wild because the parents aren't parents anymore. And so they don't end up with a civilized child who's orderly and polite and can do a task. Instead, you're having to remove children from school because they cannot control themselves as young as 2 years old. There's an old thing that used to be called the preschool to prison pipeline, and that is extraordinarily true. Children, when they don't get a proper foundation in how to be civilized, or in this case we'd say Christian character, they are not going to do well whenever they get older. And you can see society as it is. Just look at the people who are coming from other countries who have not been civilized or Christianized, if you want to call it that, as a better terminology. And they are violent. These are people who are finding it very difficult to come into an orderly, structured place. You have people throwing people off of buses and harming people, even stabbing people, and all kinds of craziness. And it has only to do with one simple thing. The places like Europe and the United States have had generations of Christian influence. So we see the world differently than other people do. And there's another side to it, as I mentioned a minute ago. You can't expect certain people to want to be civilized. You can't expect that. Now, to live in a nation that is going to be structured according to some form of religious foundation, then they're going to have to, improve themselves to be in society, as we call it, or there's going to be consequences with them legally. Now, what we're seeing right now, I've already seen two different people. One was a notable atheist promoter, always hated God, talked about how horrible and evil God was. And then he came out, was promoting the idea of coming back to a cultural Christianity, as he called it. I saw another video of a man who's a practicing, professing atheist. In other words, he doesn't like God, doesn't believe he's real, doesn't believe in God's commandments. Of course, he doesn't profess to keep them himself whatsoever. But the nation that he grew up in, which was America, was Christian influenced, 100%. As Richard Dawkins put it, cultural Christianity. It was the nation itself, the laws, the people. You could go into a movie theater and people would be quiet. You know how to act. You could get into a line and you know how you were expected to wait your turn. And all the many, many other things that come together with a place being civilized. And there's caring about the other person. Now, that only comes from Christianity. It doesn't come from anywhere else. The idea of fairness, where all men are treated equal under the law, and there are no favors about if you're rich or if you're poor or where you come from. There's no caste system in a culture saturated in Christianity. Favoritism is out. Everybody's treated the same under the law. That's what made America great. Now, to get us back to that, you have to know that there are some people you just leave alone. It's going to save you tons and tons and tons of headache. And influence the people that allow you to influence them. The saddest part is that people will go to social media and try to influence the strangers, but their families are falling apart. And for my family, when I talk to my children, we're supposed to focus on ourselves. I always teach my children, I say, what is your problem or who is your problem? And they'll say, I'm my problem. My problems come from me. If there's anything that's happening that's going wrong in my life, it's usually going to be 100% my fault. And that's how you have to train your children. Their Christian character, their civilized character, is what's going to lead them into the future. God is going to bless or not bless them based on how well they keep the commandments, or if they keep the commandments at all. Now, it's very important to bring all this up because the families are falling apart. Just here in Florida, I've grown up for 45 years now, and there's not much difference between people that go to church and people who don't go to church, for the most part, except the fact that some of them attend church and claim to be religious, and other ones just don't. But their general morality, for the most part, stays about the same. Their children's general morality stays about the same. People talk about how we have to change things, and there's a problem with this, and there's a problem with that. Well, did we teach? Did we try to influence our children? Did we try to properly teach them? I mean, are your children being raised from the time they're young to believe in God's commandments? Are they being taught how to work? Being given a work ethic? Are they being taught how to save their money? Are they being taught how to stay out of debt? Are they being taught how to stay sexually pure? Looking for a spouse who's going to work beside them and going to raise a family to the glory of God? Are they being taught how to treat one another? Are they being taught how to care for not only themselves, but other people as well? Now, Christian civilization, the foundations of Christian civilization are God's commandments. But the vast majority of people couldn't tell you where they're at in the Bible. They couldn't recite them. And they certainly don't know that every part of the Bible, every commandment that's in there, is just like an umbrella. There's the basic 10 commandments, and then all the case laws that go underneath it telling you what that commandment means. But we don't teach it anymore. So what I'm doing actually right now, something I've been wanting to do as a kind of a pet project for a long time now. And there's two things to it. On the one hand, I'm going to be creating what's called the Foundations of Christian Civilization, and it's going to be for those people who are parents, teachers, Bible teachers in particular, preachers, and how to teach the commandments, and then how to apply those commandments to the lives of the people that you're going to be influencing. Now, the purpose behind it is not just to go around condemning people nonstop, which is what most people do with the law. They use it for the condemnation only, but they don't use it for all of the positive things that is also supposed to be there. And when we structure our life according to God's commandments, we bring blessing upon ourselves and upon everybody that we come in contact with. And so to be a blessing means literally to spread law and order. That's what it means, to bring stability to everything that you touch. You bring stability to your marriage, you bring stability to your family, you bring stability to the workplace, you bring stability to the church, and you bring stability to the wider society as a whole. At least that's the goal. And we can return our nations and our peoples, but we first have to start with the people. So start with yourself. You got anything you need to fix? What about your family? How are they doing? Have you checked to see the moral structure of your family? Most people don't spend much time teaching. So the second thing I've been doing is I worked on it. I've been a Bible teacher for a very long time, and I had started many years ago, starting to do systematic Bible teaching, and I was trying to do not really a curriculum, but kind of like a curriculum for people who don't really know how to teach systematic Bible stuff, because most people don't. A lot of times people just look at the Bible as memory verses. Well, there's nothing wrong with memory verses, but being able to shout and spit out verses by memory doesn't mean that your children know what they mean, how they're cross-referenced through systematic theology. When one part of the Bible gets kind of difficult to understand, the rest of the Bible helps it make sense. Most people are quote miners, which means that they only hold to certain verses that they like. These are my favorite verses. This is how you end up with denominationalism, because there is no systematic theology being taught. And it's not being taught to the very basic child, to the family. See, the preacher and the church is not the religious home for education. It's the family, your home. That is where your children are going to be taught for the first time, and that's where they're going to be hearing 99% of the biblical education they're going to get should be coming from your family. Because it's not even done because we sit down and go over a workbook. It's every day. It's when you wake up, when you lie down, when you go by the wayside, all the time when you're encountering stuff throughout the day, and you're answering questions about the world, the life events, how somebody treated them, how they're supposed to treat each other, their brothers or sisters, other people. And so you're constantly teaching law. Now, most people would not think of it like that, but you are. And that means that most people are not teaching God's law. They're just teaching a form of humanism that they think sounds good, which makes it a problem, a major problem. Because you're not grounding your children then in God's commandments and God's word, but you're basing it on what mommy and daddy said. This was their point of view. And so whenever you teach, you're not teaching your point of view. You're teaching, thus saith the Lord. It brings the weight that's needed behind it in order to bring people into where they're supposed to be. And of course, as the Bible says, you teach the law first, so you understand that you need Christ. And those people that are his are going to flee to him. And then, of course, they're going to structure their life willingly and happily according to the commandments. But of course, most people are not doing that. So the question is, are you? Or are you going to do it? Because we have the ability to make the world a better place. Simply first, by keeping the commandments ourselves. Second, by having a godly marriage. Structuring your marriage according to what God says it should look like. Then, of course, having children. As many as God will give you. And then teaching those children and raising them up. And in Psalms it says these children grow up and they are the people who go to war with God's enemies. So having children is the way we push forward, and society is constantly being changed for the better. Because it is a spiritual battle that we're in. And you're going to have to be able to have the right weaponry. And the right weaponry is your faith and the education that you either give or don't give to your children. We are supposed to be civilized or Christian influenced ourselves first. And then you're supposed to help create a civilized family, a civilized school, a civilized town, civilized communities, churches, and then eventually the nation. But it is a top-down approach, but flip-flopped. The top is the individual, and it trickles down eventually on a larger national or global scale. But it is not the top. The top is not politics. The top is the individual. If you can only influence one person, then you have done more good than going to places where people don't want you, they don't want to hear what you have to say, and putting yourself in front of a camera, then putting yourself on social media, maybe getting punched a few times and then saying, well, they broke the law. Well, there is a certain aspect whenever they say that you're inciting people to violence. There is a certain real aspect to that. And did you go looking for it? Did you get punched for no reason? Yes, you were there sharing what you consider to be the gospel, perhaps, or most likely they're just using certain sins they're focusing on, usually is what happens. And people have pent up guilt and anger, and then you just go there to argue with them. You should have just left this person alone. Leave them to themselves and to God, and then influence all the people that you can influence. It's more of an instructional thing. It's not about going around condemning everybody. It's about educating everybody. And the educational aspect of it is much greater than just simply going around and picking petty sins so you can be the guy who's against abortion, or you're the guy who's against sexual perversion. So you're the guy against whatever it is that your hobby horse you want to pick on, and that's the thing you become known for. Well, how many children in your own family did you teach instead of going to get yourself punched in the face? How many people did you influence and educate on how to keep God's commandments instead of just arguing and getting yelled at and putting yourself on social media? There's a certain thing in the Bible that says they have, like the guy who goes out and prays really big prayers just to be seen of men. Well, that's social media 99% of the time. People are posting things on social media so that they can be seen by other people, just so they can get the clout from doing so. Say, look what a good, godly Christian I am. Well, you don't need that. You as a Christian, if you're a Christian parent, if you're a Christian teacher, your job is not to get clout from social media or have people talk well of you or because you stood against one specific type of sin. Your job is to find people and benefit them by teaching them how to obey God's commandments. Not just about what not to do, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that God does tell you what to do. And the bigger problem with the broader church community, which families come first and individuals before that, is the fact that they do not attempt to know what God wants for their lives, and they then don't try to structure it, to order it. They do not try to become civilized in the sense of Christianized greater and greater. So the foundations of Christian civilization starts with the individual. And that's why not only is your family the most important place for you to spend most of your time, and your children are the ones you should spend most of your time trying to influence them constantly in a godly fashion to promote them in the future. But then you have maybe you have a church structured family, maybe you have a small group with many different families you can then influence and help. And then, hey, here's a wild one, start a school. Let people deliberately come to you, ask you to educate and Christianize their children, and let them pay you for it. Nobody's going to be punching you in the face while you're teaching their children to keep God's commandments and how to obey mommy and daddy and how to read and write and do arithmetic. They're going to thank you. They're going to bless you. They're going to give you 5-star reviews and tell you what a wonderful impact you've had on their child and their family. Versus getting cussed at, having things thrown at you and getting punched in the face. Which one do you think sounds more like going and discipling the nations? I can tell you it's educational in its approach. It is not just to go out and condemn certain specific sins. It's taking people who are willing and wanting to be influenced or Christianized or civilized, and then going about systematically to do that. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, because for me, I am a career educator. And as a career educator, I heavily promote the family first, and then, of course, Christian schools. I have a lot more information on our website, which is cr101radio.com, and we even have an apprenticeship program, which we are trying to help other people who are interested in the concept of Christian education to get involved. And, of course, to start Christian families. So many people nowadays wait so long to get married. And it's not just the young men, it's not just the young women. It's usually the family where the problems started. They didn't teach their children anything besides, well, you have to be you first. It's not important for you to jump in there and get married. You might want to wait because, after all, you haven't had you time. No, God doesn't teach that. God teaches that young people are supposed to go out and create godly families for the glory of God. So if you're interested in more information about that, you can visit our website, cr101radio.com. More information on there. There's audiobooks. There's all kinds of stuff. But this is Jeremy Walker telling you again, our jobs are to create a civilized country, a civilized family. And that starts with the foundations of Christian civilization, which are God's commandments. Well, thank you for giving me time, and have a great day. God bless.